Okay, so how important is incident recording when it comes to, wanting to look into getting some support from RTLB?
Well, most schools record information, all sorts of different information, for a wide range of reasons. So they might record information in order to sort of look at their planning, what's going to work for students. It might be around what's going to support students with their social learning as well as their academic learning. So recording information is a sort of a normal everyday sort of piece of work that goes on in schools all the time. When schools look at that information, they make decisions on, okay, where do we need to focus our attention? So it might be that there's an issue in the playground and they'll focus their attention on that, and they might make a plan about what that's going to look like. So it could be that there's a particular part of the playground that's causing a problem, so we might ask our teachers to spend more time in that part of the playground. So when they're looking at all of that data that they collect, they start to see patterns and trends. The same would occur if, for instance, a child who's constantly or frequently coming to the attention of the schools sort of crops up, and they might start looking at that and think, well, there's a reason for this, and they may well make a plan and sort of try some strategies or some interventions to see whether that will support that child. If it isn't really working for them and they then think we need some additional support, at that point they would start to think about whether is that a request for support to the RTLB service or to ministry. They would use that information to help write that request for support, but they would always do that with the permission with consent of the whānau. And then, they would frame that up into what is it that they particularly want support with. So it's helpful, and it is part of the general sort of run of what schools do.
Yeah. And is that sort of blanket between all schools? So I know that I've heard of different sort of systems that schools use, and where they record or different ways that things are recorded, no matter sort of how small. But is there a general, from the ministry, is there a general idea of what they have to record and what is going to be helpful? For example, things that might happen, and then eventually they can go back and say, oh yes, this happened in term 1 and that in term 2. However, the parents may not have been contacted in those incidents, but they're still there located for the service referral, or what do you think?
Most schools, and actually these guys can probably answer that as well, but most schools will have some sort of a behaviour management sort of recording system. A lot of schools use what they call majors and minors, which is through the PB4L system, so through a PB4L school. And yes, they do stay in the records, so you can actually start to see whether there is a pattern to any of that. If they're all minors and they just there's one here and one there and one over there, generally it's probably never going to come to much because it's dealt with at the time. But if you see a repeated pattern or an increased frequency or an increased intensity of those sort of behaviours, then yes, that's probably when it will be very useful and they'll go back and have a look. But if it's something that happened in term 1 and then there's something similar in term 3, that in and of itself is probably not enough to sort of say, well, actually, we need some additional support here.
Is that multiple sort of, ways that it's been recorded? For example, if other parents had mentioned incidents and things, then is that something that's recorded on there so that even if the teacher wasn't the person who had initially dealt with it or that had been there when the incident had happened, that it was still sort of recorded, because that can go towards helping support that child, I suppose?
Yes, and generally in the systems that schools use, so if it's Hero or whatever their sort of SMS system is, there will be a structure to what's recorded and how it's recorded. So it will be things like, where was the incident, who was involved. So you start to see whether there's always the same children involved, or and there'll be a time, and there'll be, there's a pattern. There's a record to what all of those things look like. So they're collecting data that is apples with apples, not apples and oranges, and he said, she said sort of thing. So there is a structure to it. Yeah.
Okay. And I have heard other parents before saying things like, it's just more paperwork for them, and they don't want to have to do the paperwork. And at most workplaces it can be the instant reporting sort of thing. But is that sort of something that it's still there's a process to be done, and if that's not in there, then it's harder to get the support for the children as well, and for the teachers. I
think some of it's about looking at patterns. So a few teachers are okay with entering data if it's purposeful, and if it's just part of the culture and the norm of your workplace. So as Helen said, in our system it will be telling us what time it happened, what day of the week it happened, which teaching staff were involved, which other children were involved, what was the trigger, what was the motivation for this behaviour to happen, and that gets analysed every 5 weeks. So we're looking for children, it's normal for kids to have something, one incident. You're looking for children who may have had more than one thing. Okay, so what's the common theme? Is it always when this particular teacher's in the room, or is it always when they're in a group with that particular child? Or and then you can start to form a plan around that. You can also look at, is it this particular age group or this specific class? Do we need to put some more support into that class? So it's not always about one particular child and accessing more support for them. It can be about the bigger trend as well.
Finding a trend.
Yeah. For example, this year we found that our trickiest day of the week was actually a Tuesday, and we had absolutely no idea why it was a Tuesday, and it didn't matter how we pulled that information apart, we couldn't get to the bottom of it. So we just put a new system of behaviour, and that was the Tuesday system, and it disappeared. So just being able to see those sorts of things is really helpful.
It's awesome. It's good to know that sort of is something that's being done, whether it be by all schools or in general for teachers that might be looking for that sort of thing to say, hey, hang on, I'm noticing that this trend is happening, or more of my students are starting to display this or that, or
And I think being able to notice, okay, so this child's had 6 incidents that have happened in the last 5 weeks, but actually last time they had 15, so this is a big improvement. Or I've never seen their name in the data before, what on earth is going on for this child? In our school, teachers sit down together and analyse that data. I produce the report, and then every teacher sits down and works on it together, and then have to find next steps to change for the next 5 weeks. So you're constantly looking to improve things. I think the other thing is with that data is that when it comes to reporting things back to parents, you won't necessarily know information about other children. We have to be really careful around privacy. So, and there's always 2 sides to everything. Does mean, however, if a parent comes in and says, my child's really clashing with this particular student, you can look and see, is that what the data's telling us? Was that an issue last year? What can we do about that?